Today I'm going to be talking to you about the Homeric Question. Now, the Homeric Question comes in two parts. Firstly, who was Homer? Was he really real? And secondly, did he really write the great ancient Greek epic poems, the Iliad and the Odyssey? So we turn to the first one. Who was Homer? Now, historical sources vary on this, but the general consensus is that the only information we're told about Homer is that he's a blind man, a blind poet from Chios. Chios is a Greek island just off the coast of what is now Turkey. That is it. There's no other information available to us. Now, artistic depictions of Homer, limited mainly to statues but also some paintings, always show him as an old man with a beard. That is pretty typical of Greek art when it wants to show someone as wise. So we can't really learn much truth from them either. We'll move on to our second question, because this is the one that's perhaps more interesting and the one that can open up more of a debate. Did he really write the Iliad and the Odyssey? So, the Iliad and the Odyssey, the stories of the Trojan War and the journey home of Odysseus after, that were composed, we think, around 750 BC. Now, this is an approximate date, and it's based upon the language used in the text, the form of Greek that's used, and also some of the features of the cultures at that time. However, we do know that both of these poems come from what is called the oral tradition. So before they were written down, they were spoken aloud and learnt off by heart by poets who would travel around Greece and recite these poets to wealthy kings and their nobles. There are two main groups when it comes to debating whether Homer is the true author of these poems: the annalists and the Unitarians. So the annalists are those who believe that there are too many inconsistencies in the text for it to be considered a work by only one person. They believe that many different people in the hundreds of years that followed 750 BC made alterations until finally there was one agreed form of the story. And the name Homer is just a name given to it to claim that this Homer was the author. A couple of things they point out. In the Odyssey, towards the end, there are several really annoying inconsistencies. For example, Odysseus is disguised by Athena, which should make him impossible to recognize. Some characters recognize him and some don't, including his wife. This is extremely unbelievable. Secondly, the Odyssey finishes very abruptly. So there's a conflict between the families of the men who Odysseus has just killed and Odysseus and his family. They charge into battle, and suddenly Athena stops them, and that's it. There is no happily ever after in the Odyssey. The Unitarians, on the other hand, claim that we can overlook these inconsistencies because the genius who created such a complex plot could only ever be one person. Whether his name was Homer or not is actually besides the point. So the Unitarians pick on examples such as the word menin at the beginning of the Iliad, the opening word, which is anger. In translation, the opening line is, "Sing muse of the anger of Achilles, son of Peleus." The closing line of the poem is, "And so they buried Hector, tamer of horses." Now it is the link between this menin, this anger of Achilles, and the death of Hector, which creates a huge sense of a circle in the Iliad. And it's not just the link between the beginning and the end. Throughout the whole story, there are ingenious links between certain scenes that Unitarians claim can only have been created by one single author. In the Odyssey, there is a really good example of this as well. Odysseus plays a trick on the Cyclops. He says to the Cyclops, "My name is Nobody," so that when the Cyclops asks for help and tells his friends, "Nobody is hurting me," they go away, thinking that everything's okay. In Greek, there's an extra joke here. The word for nobody is mertis, and the word for clever or cunning is metis. So when the Cyclops says, "Nobody is hurting me," he is also saying, "Clever or cunning is hurting me." This happens to be the epithet of Odysseus, his title. This debate between the annalists, who believe that this story is too inconsistent to have Homer as its author, and the Unitarians has been raging for the past 2,500 years. The Greeks questioned it, the Romans questioned it, and all the medieval scholars questioned it. In the modern day, most scholars have come to rest on the idea that whether Homer is a real person or not, we cannot tell. But there are so many elements in the stories that are so complex that we give benefit of the doubt to assume that one person must have been able to have written both of these amazing stories.